Welcome to r/Am I the Jerk, where OP's girlfriend is demanding he propose to her. I'm 25 male, and my girlfriend, who's 23, gave me an ultimatum to propose. My girlfriend basically told me last night that if she didn't receive a ring by the end of the year, she would break up with me. The problem is, I already have a ring and I was planning on proposing on her birthday this weekend. I met my girlfriend in college, and we've been together for almost 3 years. She's my best friend, and I honestly can't imagine my life without her. I've never felt this way about anyone else before. We've talked about getting married and starting a family many times. The thing is, I've been working hard on my business, trying to become financially stable so I can support our future family. My girlfriend knows this, which is why the situation feels so bizarre. Currently, my girlfriend doesn't have a job. I've been supporting both of us, which I don't mind because I'm in a good position financially and it's something that I can handle. Over the past few months, I've finally started to see the returns from my business. All the effort I've put in for the last 4 years is finally paying off, and this year is shaping up to be our best year yet. My girlfriend has been casually looking at houses, not to buy, but just to see what's available for when we're ready. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Her birthday is this Sunday, and as far as she knows, we're hosting a party at our place. However, I had a completely different plan in mind. I had this entire proposal organized with her best friend. Her friend was going to bring her to the aquarium where we had our first date. I had already spoken with the aquarium staff and arranged for them to play our song over the speakers. I was planning to propose in front of the penguin exhibit, her favorite spot. I even hired a professional photographer to capture the moment. I had already spoken to her parents and received their blessing. Everything was set for a magical proposal. But last night, everything seemed to unravel. While we were having dinner, my girlfriend suddenly broke down in tears. I've never seen her like that before. She told me she didn't understand why I wouldn't marry her. She said she's been there for me since the beginning through all of my struggles. Then she dropped a bombshell. She said that if I didn't propose to her by the end of the year, she would leave me. At first, I thought she might have found out about my plans and was teasing me, but her tears and emotions were completely genuine. I think she might be feeling left out or insecure because many of her friends are getting married or engaged. It's possible she's comparing our relationship to theirs. Still, her ultimatum really caught me off guard. I don't want to propose because of pressure, and now I'm questioning everything. My friends have advised me against rewarding this type of behavior, but I'm not sure what to think. This is the first time I've seen her this upset, and it's shaken me up. Update. First, thanks to everyone who shared advice. Many have asked why my girlfriend isn't working. She graduates next year with a degree in biology, but we live in a rural state, and she's been having a hard time finding a job. She has been a huge help to me in my business, though, and I've told her that she doesn't have to work if she doesn't want to. I don't mind supporting her financially because we've always been such a team. After last night's incident, I spoke to her best friend to try and make sense of things. Her friend admitted she might have accidentally said something that confused or upset her, but I didn't tell her about my girlfriend's breakdown. My girlfriend has been distant since the conversation and is giving me the silent treatment. I'm not sure if she's just processing her emotions or if she's genuinely angry. Despite everything, I'm still leaning towards going through with the original plan. I want to marry her. I've wanted that for years. The ultimatum bothers me though. After everything we've been through together, how could she say she would leave me? Her best friend and little sister are flying in tonight for her birthday party, and 2 of my closest friends, who are like brothers to me, will be there too. Yes, they're single, and I know some of you will roll your eyes at their advice. Some people have also asked why I chose her birthday for the proposal. The truth is, her older sister got engaged on her birthday, and she once told me that she thought it was the most romantic thing. I've had the ring for 2 years now. We saw it at a mall during college, and she pointed out that it was her dream ring. I secretly bought it back then and only just finished paying it off last month. Do I think she would actually leave me on January 1st if I didn't propose? Honestly, I don't think she would. She might storm out for the day, but I know her well enough to believe she'd be back home before it got dark. Still, I don't want our engagement to feel like it happened because of an ultimatum. This is supposed to be a joyful milestone, not something clouded by doubt. For now, I'm trying to focus on what I know for sure. I love her, and I want to spend my life with her. Are you not sure about doing it this weekend because it will seem forced, or because you no longer are sure you want to marry her? Your answer changes my advice. Well, at least we know she was going to say yes. That's pretty complicated, because on one hand, I can understand how you'd want to put things on pause until you can sit down and have a talk about both of your feelings about marriage and engagement timelines. Ideally, it would have been better to do this before she broke down on you, but the second best time is now. On the other hand, there isn't necessarily anything about this sudden ultimatum that necessarily changes your plans. You were planning on proposing to her anyway, well within her timeline expectations, and you could always talk to her later about how you had this proposal planned well before she gave you the ultimatum. In my opinion, have a talk with her as soon as possible about each of your feelings on marriage and wedding timelines, and confirm with her that you're on the same page. Then carry on with the Sunday proposal. I'm sorry to tell you, OP, but for me, this behavior is a really big red flag. Breaking down because you didn't propose after just 3 years with your age, not having a job but spending money on your dime while you've been busting your tail for years and setting an ultimatum for the proposal? To be really honest, it sounds to me like someone who wants to get married so she can have a certain financial safety for when you guys split. That when she leaves, she'll take a lot of money with her. So please, OP, if you still want to propose to her and proceed your plan, make sure you make really good arrangements when you get married. Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or his girlfriend? Please let us know. My boyfriend's optimism and immaturity almost destroyed me financially. My boyfriend and I started dating in July of 2014. He's the biggest optimist I've ever met and lived a relatively cushy life as the only child of divorced parents. At the time, we both lived separately and had jobs that covered all of our bills and then some. He indulged in luxuries like an expensive sports car, a gaming computer, and a purebred dog. This becomes important later. While he was still in school, I had already graduated and was working at my first big kid job. Life was great, and the first 6 months of our relationship were some of the happiest days of my life. In January 2015, everything began to change. My boyfriend was wrongfully terminated from his job. A new supervisor had been angling to replace everyone on his shift with his own friends and waited until after the holiday rush to start making changes. The government sided with my boyfriend in his unemployment claim, and then he began receiving benefits. He decided to focus on finishing school instead of finding another job. This is where the cracks began to show. He was supposed to graduate in May, but he failed a class and couldn't. That meant he had to take summer classes. By June, his savings had run out, and he could only afford either his car payment and insurance or his rent. His lease was up at the end of July, so I agreed to cover his rent and he moved in with me to finish school. A few weeks before his new graduation date, we learned he needed one more elective to graduate. He had to extend his schooling to the fall semester. I demanded that he find a job to help with expenses since I hadn't planned on supporting him for such a long time. Covering him for a month or two was fine, but 6 months or more? No. At the end of July, he started a job as an insurance agent for a reputable company. However, the position was commission-based. Being the eternal optimist, he was drawn in by his manager's talk of unlimited earning potential. I even paid for the certification tests he needed to take. Despite his hard work, building a client base from scratch without family privilege or an existing network was incredibly difficult. He made very little, perhaps $700 from a small deal every few months, but it was nowhere near enough to cover his share of expenses. In July of 2015, we downsized from my fancy downtown apartment to a rundown house on the edge of a poor neighborhood. I paid the security deposit and double rent for both places during the transition, costing about $3,500. By November, my savings were nearly gone. I had to liquidate shares of my family trust to keep us afloat, even though it meant paying a penalty since my grandfather didn't want us accessing the funds before age 25. By December, my trust was empty, and I only had $300 left in savings. Between July and December, I had spent around $17,000 on supporting both of us, his job, his dog, and my dog. We began having recurring fights about money and chores. I expected him to pick up most of the housework as his way of contributing, but he didn't follow through. Instead, he repeated the same optimistic lines from his manager. "It'll get better. Everyone struggles at first. Hang on and we'll make it. Once I make it, we'll be rolling in it." He said this every time we argued. 2 weeks before Christmas, I reached my breaking point. After yet another fight, I stormed out, planning to crash at a friend's place. But as I drove, anger bubbled up inside me. Why should I leave my house, the one I pay for, while he stays there comfortably? I went home and told him he had 10 days to pack his things and leave. He moved in with his dad, and I spent Christmas morning with my dog, returning his gifts online. We started hanging out again in January of 2016, and things initially seemed to be improving. His business appeared to be gaining traction, and he even considered getting his own apartment. I allowed him to move back in under strict conditions. If he couldn't split expenses evenly, he had to get serious about doing chores and sticking to a budget. It was fine at first, But by April, he had stopped doing chores and I was back to covering 100% of his and his dog's living expenses. When he realized he wouldn't meet his sales quota for the quarter, he asked me to sign up for a policy and then cancel it later so he could meet his numbers. I lost it. I work in capital markets and cannot afford to commit financial fraud for anyone, let alone my boyfriend. I told him I had sacrificed enough and that he couldn't ask me to compromise my integrity. As a side note, a friend of his who agreed to this same scheme still hasn't been reimbursed 5 months later. After a massive argument, he finally stepped up with chores, which he's continued to this day. However, money remained an issue. Even when he did get paid, his car payment swallowed the money. He landed a big case in May and was able to pay his share of rent in June, even offering to cover all of July, which he did. But by mid-July, he was broke again. He informed me at the last minute that he couldn't pay for August rent, leaving me scrambling to cover it. He also couldn't contribute to groceries as promised, which added even more stress. I'm exhausted. I have a great job, paid off all my college debt within 8 months of graduation, and own my car outright. Yet I'm living paycheck to paycheck because I'm supporting him. It's been over a year and there's been no real improvement. His job seems designed for wealthy trust fund kids who can afford to build a client base while being perpetually broke. I admire his optimism, but I'm the one suffering for it, not him. Last night, I told him I wouldn't be renewing the lease and that I'd be moving out on my own. He followed me around the house, pleading with me and asking questions like, "What about us? How do you feel about me? What will it take for me to come with you?" These are questions he's asked during every single fight, and I'm done answering them. I told him it was his life to figure out, not mine. I can't believe he feels abandoned after everything I've done for him. He doesn't seem to understand how hurtful it is when he tries to cover his half of the bills with empty promises and motivational quotes. It feels so disrespectful, and I've told him this repeatedly, yet he doesn't seem to listen. Why would he? I've made it easy for him by constantly picking up the slack and not enforcing my boundaries. At this point, I feel like I'm his safety net. He knows I won't let him or his dog starve, so he doesn't take responsibility for his finances. It's become clear to me that his unrelenting optimism blinds him to reality. He overestimates his potential success and underestimates the consequences of his failures. I don't trust his promises anymore because he's barely kept any of them. He hasn't matured because he hasn't had to face the full weight of his choices. Those consequences have fallen on me. I miss the man I met during those first 6 months. Back then, he had a steady job, and I thought we could build a life together. Now, I feel like I've been parenting him instead of partnering with him. I'm heartbroken because I still love him, but that love feels like a burden now. I wonder if our relationship can survive these changes or if I'm naive to believe he'll grow out of this. I can't keep sacrificing myself for his sake. He needs to face reality and take risks without dragging me down with him. Part of me hopes he'll become the person I fell in love with, but another part knows I've reached my limit. There's no hope. You cannot change anyone but yourself. He's the only one who can change himself. Instead of changing, he's doubling down on a philosophy that has proven to be a failure. Why isn't he getting another job? Even if he can't let himself end this dream and quit, he could at least work a second job, one that would actually pay minimum wage. OP. He still has office hours during the day, and it infuriates me that they don't pay him for that. He can't get a second job for that reason, as he's meeting clients before and after common working hours. He can't even be an Uber driver because his fancy car is on the restricted cars list, and there's no way he's going to take my car too. I hate his stupid car so much. It represents how financially immature he is because he didn't even use his money wisely when he had it and continues to do himself over to this day. Did I mention he hasn't paid taxes or registered the car either because he doesn't have the money? I'm not sure who will end up paying that inevitable ticket, but it sure as heck won't be me. While he's certainly to blame for being irresponsible, I think you also share the blame for spending over $17,000 on someone you had been dating for less than 2 years at that point, and then taking him in again and putting yourself in the same situation. You ask if your relationship is repairable, but this isn't just about what he can do to shape up. What are you going to do to avoid making a series of poor choices again in the future when he messes up? You can't control the choices he makes, but you can control the choices you make, and you've made some very questionable ones. Personally, I would never want to put myself in a relationship with someone who can't support himself and has drained my bank account like that. I would feel like his mother, not his partner, and that's supremely unattractive. You're better off cutting your losses and learning from this. Update 1 month later. After I made this post, I decided to truly cut him off. I changed the Wi-Fi password, froze the credit card I had given him, applied to close our joint accounts, and threw out any gifts I ever gave him. We had been planning to attend a dork convention over Labor Day in Atlanta, something I had budgeted for both of us over a year ago. I told him he couldn't go unless he paid for his half of the hotel and tickets, $600. I'm not sure why I didn't just tell him outright that he was out of his mind if he thought he could go. I shouldn't have played any games, but in hindsight, I'm glad I did because he texted me, promising me he'd have $1,000 to me by the end of August. That was in writing. I was floored. Suddenly, he could find money for a weekend of partying and attempt to reel me back in? I told him I would apply that to August bills and that he'd need to start paying off the $25,000 he owed me for supporting him over the past year before spending money on luxuries like out-of-state vacations. He didn't respond and slept on the couch again that night. That was Friday. Saturday morning, he left the house at 9 a.m. with his dog, leaving all his belongings behind. I piled all his and his dog's stuff under the desk, removed any pictures of him from the house, and blocked him everywhere except Facebook and text. Then I went to 2 rental house showings, fell in love with one, put down a deposit, went on multiple walks with my dog, and spent the evening drinking wine through Twizzlers with my next-door neighbor and her boyfriend. He didn't come home that night. Sunday was blissful. I spent the day working on cosplays and outfits for the convention, goofing off with my neighbor and my dog. I kept waiting for a wave of sadness or regret to hit me, but it never came. After 24 hours with him gone and knowing his name wasn't on the lease, I texted him to say his claim to residency was null and he needed to schedule a time to come get his stuff with 24 hours notice. He said he'd come that night. I reminded him about the notice policy and he agreed to come Monday evening. Monday, he showed up with his father's truck, collected his belongings, and returned the key. By Wednesday, his best friend texted me like nothing was wrong. On Thursday, I texted my ex about when I could expect the promised check. He didn't respond. I emailed him Friday morning and sent a final follow-up the next day, acknowledging his apparent no-contact approach. That's when he asked me to meet for coffee on Sunday night. At the coffee shop, he avoided the topic of repayment entirely. Instead, we talked about our feelings. He said he felt betrayed and abandoned, claiming that my decision to cut him off financially proved that I never really supported him. He insinuated that if I truly believed in us, I wouldn't expect repayment. I sat there stunned as he painted himself as the victim of my financial boundaries. When I realized he genuinely felt just as used as I did, my stomach dropped. I knew I was done. I let him finish talking, then we parted ways. He asked if he could contact me, and I said I needed a break. The next day, I emailed him about the $1,000 he promised and reminded him we hadn't discussed repayment during our meeting. He didn't respond for days. Just as I was leaving town for the convention, he finally replied, saying the money was on its way. When I returned home, I found the check in an unpostmarked envelope in my mailbox. It creeped me out. He had trespassed on my property while I was away. I cashed the check and emailed him, requesting he use the postal service for future payments. His reply was a mix of mushy "I love you" sentiments and excuses, claiming he was too nice and couldn't say no, which supposedly led to his neglect of both himself and me. The apology was laughable. It essentially boiled down to, "I was so nice and helpful that I drained you of your money and energy. My bad." I responded, "You broke my heart and my bank account. It will be a long time before both are fixed, and by then, I hope I won't be foolish enough to trust you a third time. I'll respond to emails about repayment. Otherwise, good luck." His final email was a desperate plea. "If I could take everything back that I did, I would. I love you, OP, with all my heart. I could have prevented it all. I could have taken action, but I let you slip away. That'll be one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I'm truly, truly sorry for hurting you. I just want you to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted." I moved out of the house we had shared to a similar one a few streets away. The move kept me busy enough to not dwell on the breakup. I threw out all of our memories and photos in the process, creating a space that was entirely mine. Settling into my new place, I expected to feel crushed, but instead, I felt humiliated. At the convention, there were a few lonely moments where I needed a cig to calm down, but overall, I partied hard and enjoyed myself. Now, I barely have the urge to check his Instagram. Every time I see a picture of him, it's just a reminder of how naive I was to believe he was the one. I'm distrustful of my feelings now. Back then, I had no doubt we'd be together forever. It felt as certain as my own name. These days, even when I meet someone cute or have a great conversation, I have no desire to pursue anything more. My feelings led me so far astray last time that I don't trust them enough to act on them. But that's it. It's over, and life goes on. My ex has power of attorney and is trying to sell off everything I own. Background: I was out of the country for over 2 months while being treated by specialists for medical problems. During that time, I stored my personal valuables with a storage company that was supposed to offer good security. Since I don't have close family, I didn't want to leave things like my computers sitting in the apartment for such a long time. I also ensured that my payments were set to automatically go to a specific amount, as I have renters in my old house and needed to make sure certain bills were paid without my intervention. I thought I had everything set up properly to allow me to focus on my treatment and return to things as I left them. Some time ago, when I was in a lot of pain and on heavy medications, I had a lawyer help me ensure that my now ex-partner could make decisions for me if I ever became incapacitated. Honestly, I had almost completely forgotten about this arrangement because I was in such a foggy state of mind at the time. I barely remember anything about it. The night before my flight, my ex told me they couldn't be with me anymore because of my health problems. They said I wasn't going to make it and they didn't want to be around for that. My issues are severe, and while my life expectancy might not be as long as it could have been, their words devastated me. At the time, I couldn't mentally handle the situation, so I simply said, okay, and I left for my trip. We had been together for 16 months, but we weren't strictly living together. Fast forward to the present. I returned to find that my ex had somehow started taking and possibly selling everything I owned. They had paperwork claiming I was incapacitated in addition to the power of attorney I had granted them. However, I was never incapacitated during my treatment. I have no idea what doctor could have signed off on such a claim. While I was away, my ex used this alleged documentation to check my belongings out of storage. I have no idea where my things are now, and I'm terrified they've already been sold. They also took items from my apartment. The tenants in my house were told by my ex that I was bedridden and that they had to move out because my house was being sold. These tenants were on a month-to-month lease, and they took my ex at their word, moving out before I even got back. When I returned, they informed me that a realtor had been showing my house to prospective buyers. I managed to contact the realtor. Once I explained the situation, they freaked out. They told me the house had already been listed far below market value, a buyer had been found, and documents had been signed. Some money had even exchanged hands, and the buyers were already preparing to move in. I demanded the realtor cancel everything, but they said the paperwork my ex provided appeared legitimate. They needed time to figure out how to handle this. In the meantime, the account I set up before my trip had been drained to mere pennies, causing me to miss an important payment. The bank confirmed that my ex accessed the account and everything appeared in order because of the claim I was incapacitated. My ex had known about this account and its purpose. They likely gathered the details from my apartment before I left. I spoke to both my ex and the police. My ex has been unresponsive for the most part. When I confronted them at their door and screamed at them, they eventually told me they acted because I was in a coma, which is completely untrue. Through the door, I think I heard them say something like, "You won't need it anyway." The police have been less helpful than I had hoped. I tried to report my ex for theft regarding my belongings from storage, but they told me it was a civil matter. When I explained the broader situation, the officer seemed unsure how to respond. Sitting at the station feels like a waste of time. They keep telling me to return the next day to speak with someone else. Apparently, officers went to my ex's place and were shown the paperwork, which seems to have stalled their investigation. Tomorrow, I have an appointment with a lawyer who specializes in elder mistreatment and power of attorney fraud, as it was the closest expertise I could find. If they can't help, I don't know where to turn next. Is there something specific I can say to the police to get them to act quickly and arrest my ex? I want to believe this will all be resolved eventually, but I feel so overwhelmed and unsure. How done for am I? Edit. I'm a woman in my early 30s, and my ex is a man around the same age. Am I the jerk for telling my niece it's her fault that my horse kicked her? I, 27 female, have a niece who's 14. She's the daughter of my older brother, who's 36, and his wife, who's 34. She's a very sweet girl, and she loves my horses and the other horses I board, which are my friends. My brother and his wife live in the city, while I live in my uncle's ranch on my mother's side in a different state. My brother and I have different moms, but the same dad. They sent my niece to come stay with me for a few months, which I greatly accepted. She's been good, and she calls her friends back at her home state and FaceTimes her parents once in a while. She's a great help with feeding my animals and my horses. The only problem is she doesn't know how to ride horses and sometimes teases the horses. I have two very young horses, a filly and a colt, which are both very excited horses, and I don't really allow her in the field with them, as they like to kick and buck even when people are around. And I have an old stallion, which was my first horse my uncle got me. His name is Rooster, and he's 32 years old. This is my niece's favorite horse. She always wants to ride him, but I don't allow anyone to ride him, and I don't ride him anymore. He's very patient and kind, but he doesn't like anyone touching his back legs or his tail when you walk behind him. He will kick, but when he knows you're there, he doesn't mind being pet, as long as you approach him from the front. Overall, he's a great horse. She'll tease him with a lunging whip by tickling his back legs and his tail, trying to get him to kick. I've told her numerous times and I've warned her, but she still continues to do it behind my back. Well, I told her to go get Rooster out of the pasture and into his stall. She went to go get him, and I heard a scream in the barn. I get over there, and she was holding onto her leg, crying in pain, while Rooster ran back to the pasture. I asked her what happened, and she said Rooster had kicked her left thigh, and I asked her if she had touched Rooster on his back legs or his tail. She said she pushed him on his tail to get him in his stall, and that was when he kicked her and ran off. She started yelling about Rooster and how she doesn't want to be around him. I told her it's her fault. She provoked him, and for not listening to me after so many warnings. I told her that bruise on her leg is a lesson now to be careful around bigger animals, especially ones that can kick at any moment. She can walk it off, and she called her parents after. They called me and told me it was my fault for not supervising her and that they're gonna get her home. I told them everything, but they won't listen, and my sister-in-law told me I need to get rid of Rooster. I told her no and hung up. Now I'm wondering, am I the jerk? Not the jerk. 14 is old enough to take directions and warnings. You've told her several times not to do what she did. She didn't listen and continued to do it anyway. Rooster gave her a lesson and why she should listen to warnings and directions. I mean, if you keep telling a kid not to touch a stove because it's hot and they don't listen and touch the stove anyway, are you going to throw the stove out? To me, this is the logic of the mother. OP. I've warned her so many times and she always reassures me she won't do it. But for some reason, she would record teasing my horse Rooster. I even had friends who saw her do it. They told me not to let her around my horses anymore. I thought I could trust her, but now I do believe that she needs to go home. My parents don't like my boyfriend, so they gave me an ultimatum. I'm an only child, and my current boyfriend and I have been dating for 6 years, starting when I was 19 and he was 20. We met at junior college, where we started dating, and after that we went to different universities, but within an hour of each other. My parents met him early on by joining us at dinner. Everything seemed to go well. Then soon after, we went to his parents' house, who live about 2 hours from my parents, so I could meet his family. And after learning this, my mom told me how hurt she was that we didn't come to see them too. I expressed that this weekend was for me to meet his family, but it was clear that she felt almost betrayed. Fast forward, my parents invite me up to our cabin and my boyfriend joins. We take my car because it was already loaded with laundry, etc. After we arrive, my dad pulls me aside and pretty much quietly yells at me for how wrong it is that I drove and that we took my car. He's the man. He should be driving. Blah, blah, blah. This started everything going forward on a sour note. The cabin is in Tahoe. It gets cold in the winter, so my boyfriend wore a sweatshirt with his hood up during some of the time at the cabin. My parents to this day cite this as weird and rude, as well as a reason that they don't like him. As we continue our relationship, it's clear that my parents don't like him, but they can't really give me what would be a good justifiable reason. They'll say he's just not a good fit for the family. They don't tell me to stop dating him because they can't, I'm an adult, but they do tell me that I need to keep them and him separate. They don't want to really hear about him, and he's not welcome at their house or cabin. He's never cheated on me, mistreated me, he doesn't have any issues with substances, nothing like that a normal parent would see as a problem. Eventually, it became an ultimatum given to me by my parents. They'd tell me that if I continue to date him, eventually it will be either him or us, and you'll have to choose. Among other things, they would tell me that he'd never be an attorney, which is what he wanted to do, and insinuating that he probably wouldn't be much of anything at all. After undergrad, I started working at a financial firm. He graduated from undergrad at UC Berkeley and was accepted to law school across the country. We were always very serious about each other and made the decision to do long distance until he graduated and moved back to California. My boyfriend has since graduated from law school, moved home, and took the bar last month. He starts work this October and had a contract since last year. They've known about this as well. Now, 6 years into our relationship, I call my parents and tell them that we're going to be moving in together. About 20 minutes later, I get a text from my mom saying that she doesn't want to rain on my parade, but that this path excludes her and my dad from my future. That they love me, but they can't be in my life if I choose to be with my boyfriend. I told them I would never understand. Since then, they've sent me more and more text messages saying things like, "We feel like we're losing our daughter. This is heartbreaking," etc. And all the same time, including that this is my choice and my fault. I texted my parents that I thought my boyfriend and I should come over and talk, that texting about this kind of thing was stupid, but not to be patronized or belittled, and if it turned to screaming, then we would leave. My parents then replied that they wanted to see me face to face to talk, but that my boyfriend isn't allowed. My boyfriend even called my father the night of the initial "we can't be part of your life" text to try and talk or meet up and see if there was a way to talk through any legitimate concerns. My dad did not answer and did not respond until a week later, only to text him that they haven't really ever liked him, that he wants to work through it with me alone, and it's mine and my boyfriend's fault for not trying to address things earlier. Among other ridiculous reasons to not like my boyfriend were, "Berkeley isn't a man's college," my dad. One time in college, my professor lost my final exam, and when I found out via my final grade and was frantically calling her to figure out what happened, my parents told my boyfriend, "See, this is why we didn't want her to have a boyfriend in college." They found ways to blame him for everything. The only thing that ever had any merit was that he wasn't working yet. Well, this was because he was going to school to be a lawyer. Apparently, marrying someone who will make a lot of money is a bad thing. My boyfriend is the nicest, most calm and peaceful person ever, and he loves me more than anything. But apparently, their pride is more important than being wrong and accepting him. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if this is normal, or if it's as wrong as it feels for my boyfriend and I. Edit. Boyfriend, as well as my parents and myself, are of the same race. Somewhat similar financial status as well. No important details left out, I promise. I wanted objective feedback. Believe me, if there was more, my parents would make it known to me and I would have included it in the post. Do this next. Tap here on your screen to come see our new podcast playlist, where you'll find thousands of hours of the best stories you've ever heard. Or tap the one on the right. That episode is specifically just for you, based on other videos you've enjoyed the most.